Well, welcome to the math department. You've probably been to a session or so already, but we're very excited to have you here, and we hope that you learned some things about Calvin Christian in the 10 minutes that we're together. My name is Dave Decker. I've been teaching here for a while, and I think Calvin is a great place to be. What I hope to talk about for a minute or two is just how does our school theme of loving, learning, and serving, how does that fit in our math classroom? So I'm going to do a very brief intro on that, and some of my colleagues are going to talk about a few of those areas a little bit more in depth. But hopefully some of the things that I discuss here you've maybe heard before in other math classes. So how do we show love or learn about love in the math class? I think that probably a lot of ways that we could do that. I just want to touch on two of them. Specifically, how do we learn more about God and learn to love God through our study, and then also the classmates that we have here. How do we get to know them a little bit better? So I think a lot of ways are possible to talk about how we learn to love God. I'm just going to focus on two things. How do we learn about Him being creative, and how do we learn about Him being consistent? And we could do that through a variety of ways. I just want you to think of maybe a typical homework question that you've had in class before. The way that you solve that question could be totally different than a friend. It could be totally different than someone at another school, totally different than someone in an upper level math class who's maybe learned a little bit more. So we see a lot of creative ways on how God has given us abilities to solve these questions. We see that creative side, but we also always get to that same answer, and so there's some consistency there too. So as we study math, I think we see some characteristics of God through the ways that we're allowed to solve problems. And then we get to know our classmates, so we learn to love our classmates. We have had an increased emphasis on collaboration. We work together a lot more in our classrooms. And I think a result of that is we want our classmates to be successful as well. So we look out for each other, we get to know each other, and through that we're showing some love too. How do we learn in the math class? I think this is probably the easiest one maybe to talk about, because you think of all the formulas that you learn. It helps us to understand how the world works. And we can make lots of connections to other classes that we're taking. So all the science classes, a lot of the formulas we learn here we take and use over there. Some of the social studies classes might use some of the statistics that we learn about. And then we've had an increased emphasis on getting projects into our classrooms. And so we try to make some real life applications available to some of these topics that we study as well. And then finally, how do we serve in the mathematics classroom? I think we spend a lot of time talking about the idea of stewardship. How can we use the math that we're learning to care for God's creation, to make the world a better place? And then at times we also talk about, well, how can math be misused every now and then too? So Mrs. Van Scheppen is going to talk a little bit more about that last point.
All right, so a lot of our courses focus on the good that can be seen in math, by looking at real life situations, and also by just looking at the beauty of God's creation through mathematical representations. However, we can also focus on the sin that has entered and how we can redeem it as well. So for example, in personal finance, we study how various debts, like credit card debt, can prevent us from living the life God calls us to because we are unfortunately strapped in debt. We decipher wants and needs and also look at advertising techniques, so we're more aware of the motives behind our purchases and also more aware of Satan's trap of temptation and coveting. We examine how to balance giving and saving while also budgeting not only our finances but also our time and our talents, so that we are using the resources God has given us wisely. In statistics, we study various types of ways that data can be used to misrepresent relationships, and also how that can be redeemed too. So for example, let's say students are learning about measures of center, like mean and median. We look at how they can be misused so that they draw maybe an incorrect conclusion. So if there is a person that wants to say that this company has high salaries, good salaries, they might report the mean, so that they're showing and including the CEO's huge salary, and thus that average gets bumped up, and we get this false impression. By becoming more aware of how statistics can be misused, students gain a little bit more on how to discern, and also then how we can use statistics in a God-honoring way.
Another area that we're starting to work on and develop more in the mathematics department is communicating mathematically, which I'm sure is not a popular topic for all of you, because, for example, We always tell you to show your work and be detailed and be accurate. So as much as a student might want to use an answer like, use a test point and just be done, we want them to clarify and be precise and give details and to communicate effectively. And so when you are using a test point, you technically have to evaluate it. If you need to evaluate it, then you have to understand what the answer is about, and we want you to communicate all of those things. And so communication is very important to the math class. So it can happen on daily homework such as this. We are also, as Mr. Decker said, using more and more projects in the math classroom. This, again, develops more critical thinking. It makes them compare and contrast, and then again, communicate. If you learn something, you need to be able to communicate it to others. So whether it's standing in front of a classroom like this, where you can share different things you learned from your project, putting something together that is a nice looking Google slide presentation or different types of things. Math just isn't about skills anymore, it's about being able to communicate what you have learned. And we also do that as part of groups. Again, collaboration serves so many good purposes. One is it develops community. We're all in this together. We want to support each other. We want to value and respect each other when we work together. That's a wonderful thing that we can do. But it also then forces you to consider other points of view, to make evaluations, to consider different things. So that's another benefit. And as we involve these different things and talk about different things in the world, again, we are using real life situations that hopefully help students say, well, what's out there in the world and how can I make a difference? And so lots of different ways we can communicate and use our math.
At Calvin, we are working to make the practical value of mathematics in understanding and impacting creation clearly evident to our students. We are doing this by having the students practice critical thinking through various projects that apply concepts in real-life context. In geometry, we are partnering with professionals to create authentic projects that move beyond basic formula application. For example, this week, students are completing a floor plan project that was created with the help of architects, designers, and builders. And you can see an example of one of our students' work there on the left. So next week, the students will be working with basic volume equations to identify the proper sizing of things, such as pots, pans, and bowls, heating and cooling systems, mulch and concrete needs, and even estimating the volume of their own bodies. In algebra, the students are able to apply their learning to evaluate data that is important to them. In several functional modeling projects where they choose to work with relationships and organizations that God has placed on their own hearts. In this, they consider how that knowledge is important to the sustaining and redeeming of creation. We are also working with coaches to evaluate statistics and functional relationships in significant data values that go beyond just shooting percentages and completion rates.
At this point, we figured you were probably ready to be done listening to teachers, so we have a couple of our esteemed students here to share their perspectives on things as well.
All right, hi everyone, I'm Johnny and I'm a senior here at Calvin Christian. In my years here at Calvin Christian, I have had an overwhelmingly positive experience with the math department. The staff here not only know about the subjects they teach, but they teach in a way that makes it understandable for all students. They also are approachable enough to ask questions when you don't understand, and the 3 teachers that I have had know that I ask a lot of questions. It's especially important for us as students to understand the patterns that God has placed in the world through math, and the teachers here do a great job of showing us that.
Hi, my name is Rachel, and I'm a current statistics student. We started the year off by talking about data and different ways to collect and use this data. We specifically talked about how when collecting data, we must make sure that we are not leaving out groups of the population, also that we do not state our opinion, and that the questions that we are asking are not misleading. We not only look at this data from a mathematical standpoint, but we view it from a Christian perspective as well. Mrs. Van Scheppen taught us that it is very important to be truthful when collecting our data and to display it in ways that are clear and concise. I have really enjoyed stats so far, and I think it's really interesting to see how God can work through all things, including math.
So thank you for participating. Our time is almost up. We have probably 40 more topics we could talk about. Again, remember at the end of the night, we will all be available during the open information fair. If you do have questions, things about student support, different course options, lots of different things are available. We would love to talk to you more at the end of the night. But at this point, please continue your tour and we hope you enjoy it.